We spoke last year about some of the standard industry tools for the film industry that the Foundry has. And this year we kind of wanted to focus on the secondary side, and that is there's a lot of activity in VR. They have the VR theater and a lot of things going on. What sort of tools does the Foundry have for addressing the people in the VR space?
We have for a while had this tool set called Cara VR, which was designed for helping people use our Nuke product to produce 360 stereo wraparound VR experiences. And it's a project we kicked off a long time ago. So in some senses, while VR is still perpetually seems to be in its infancy, the product itself is relatively mature at this point, has a wide amount of, has had a lot of usage in creating this kind of content over the last several years, in fact.
Is it similar to use the product like it is for using Nuke, or is it a whole different kind of concept flow for being able to do the 360 and the stereoscopic?
They're really very related disciplines. So this is a plug-in tool set that fits within Nuke, okay. And typically then anyone doing this kind of work will be mixing fairly traditional ideas about workflow, mixing it in with the 360 elements. And the critical bits really are producing an environment where the common problems that people face with multi-camera acquisition for that kind of media are dealt with in a nice way, and the ability of an artist to visualize while they're working what the end product will look like is basically what that tool set's there to do. A lot of heavy maths trying to make some of that work easier.
One of the things that we're seeing as a trend is, especially with these franchise films, that they're creating a large number of assets that are visual effects for the film, but then their advertising and marketing campaigns, they're looking to have a VR or an AR component. In your workflow, do you allow people to share those asset base between kind of the VR solutions and the regular solutions, or are they completely different products?
So that's there's a lot of stuff in there to unpack. Maybe try and think of a good place to start. So yes, you're right in general that the idea of asset reuse is really important, and it's also exists in other phases, I guess, of production. So the idea being that up front you create assets which are usable in what we might call traditional linear media, as well as in interactive experiences, has been kind of like on the boil for some time. Mm-hmm. It's a hard thing to actually get right because depending on what you're trying to do, the end use cases might be quite different. But also there's, in any case, within the creation of media which is not, I guess, explicitly VR. So if we look at the way that people do on-set work or the way they do previs work, again, you're dealing with the creation and use of assets, quite often in real-time environments, quite often visualized in a virtual environment, where historically the industry has had these things as quite separate silos. So I create something for previs, I may visualize stuff in set in a virtual environment. Quite often the assets used and the systems used for those have been distinct. They've kind of like grown up organically for those particular use cases. So there is a big interest in making these assets reusable, not just for the creation of experiences related to the main media, but also as part of creating that media itself. So it's a big topic, but I think solving it, we're very much in the infancy there.
So, and extending that, because it is a big topic, especially with these assets, most people know Nuke and the other tools in the visual effects side. At the press conference yesterday, you were showing how the Moto product is now bringing visualization for industrial design to the front of the flow rather than being at the back of the flow.
So, I mean, is your question really around does outside product design, is that kind of process of ideation and visualization up front becoming increasingly common?
Yes.
Again, it's a really tough question because it does make sense. The industry at the moment is really in a position where efficiency and planning are one of the key ways we can improve the rate at which we produce media and the efficiency with which teams create stuff. So with that in mind, you would then expect that a lot more upfront work in planning, building assets in advance, planning environments in advance, and being very clear well before production, and certainly well before post-production, what these assets and materials look like, feels intuitively like the right thing to do. But I guess the stresses that working against that is the fact that this is a very creative process where decisions are often deferred as late as possible.
Yes.
Because the creative process, the iterations on creativity happen all the way until basically money or time runs out. So working against the idea of upfront planning, building of assets, is the idea that change is always possible until it's too late, which ultimately means that some of the work up front to create things may later be wasted. Maybe an example of that is in the early stages of making a movie, for example, that a lot of work goes into doing concept work for what the movie should look like. But we're all very aware that most VFX studios of any reasonable size have their own art departments, because later on in the process you need to finesse ideas that were incomplete, or ideas that have changed, or ideas that have been introduced along the way. So for better or worse, the whole thing is such an organic process. It's one of those things that slightly defies a lot of upfront planning, while it would seem to be a good idea.
Yeah, one of the things we've been seeing, especially in the VFX side, is people want complete flexibility to make changes or new ideas as late as possible, but then the people who are financing them are saying, no, we want to constrain it, because otherwise you'll never finish, because you could infinitely play what if.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe that the fact that at the end of the day, really, what we're creating art. So we have a layer of commercials around the industry. It is a business, but in that creative process, the creative process really continues until there's no time left. And to some extent, it differs very much at that point from the work we do in doing concept work and early ideation for product, where the bulk of the work that has to happen has to be fixed at some point prior to manufacture. So there is that the bulk of the effort and the time is the industrialized part of the product creation. The creation of media for entertainment, the whole process is virtual. We're only dealing in digital data all the way through until we finally get to see it on the screen. And I think that enables people to make those late decisions, or feel empowered to make those late decisions. But I love that conflict. I don't think it's a bad thing. But you're exactly right. There's a conflict between the need to keep things on schedule, on time, on budget, predictable, plannable, yet still enable people creative freedom. And that's the world we live in, which I think is in many ways great.
So then, kind of the last wrap-up question for this environment, since you have a diversity of products, what's kind of the main focus you're showing here at SIGGRAPH 2019?
There's I guess it links in with some of the things we've talked about, which is that in a world where, given enough time and budget, we can make the perfect image, give or take some neat innovations that are still going on at a show like SIGGRAPH, then a lot of what we're showing at shows like this now is around how we improve the efficiency of the process, both from a planning point of view, from a resourcing point of view. So we have a lot of effort here on cloud, for example. How can people take advantage of cloud in order to improve their access to flexible resourcing? Our products, there's a lot of work we now do in terms of trying to better understand the artist interaction, removing the number of button clicks to do certain things, improving the compute performance of the products themselves, and other topics for us, for example, at the show like this, are looking at demonstrating to people what we're now doing in deep learning, for example. And our effort in deep learning, again, is very much oriented around an artist has to do some work. The artists themselves aren't replaceable, but a lot of the drudge work that might be involved in what they do can be aided by the kind of things we can now do in machine learning. So the theme for us really at the show is all about those ideas, which is to enable people to be creative, but to be creative in a far more flexible way, make use of the real-time technologies around rendering, which are now enable people to produce high-quality imagery very quickly, all of which is there to allow people to be more creative, produce more iterations, and ultimately end up with a better result.